Hey there, welcome back to the Fuse Show. I'm David Tran, and I'm the co-host of this show as well as the co-founder of Xfusion.io. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Alice Chan. She's the founder of the Flock Marketing Collective. She's an entrepreneur at heart and a firm believer in the multi-hustle. She's founded and run businesses and worked inside early and late-stage startups. She started her career in London in the early 90s and arrived in Silicon Valley just in time for the dot-com boom. And she's really passionate about marketing and communications and starting fires. Thanks for joining us on the show, Alice.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So I noticed that one of your self-descriptions on LinkedIn is that of being a reinventor. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think primarily I apply that to myself. I feel like, especially when you've had a career as long as mine seems to be going on for, you can easily get bored, right? If you just keep doing. It sounds like you're a reinventor too. I shouldn't speak for everybody else, but for myself, I really enjoy, tackling new things, getting my brain wrapped around things that maybe it hasn't had to tackle in the past, mastering things. And then I think, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I find myself tapping my fingers on the table going, what's next? I need to do something interesting. And so I've gone through, you mentioned like the multi-hustle. I kind of coined that phrase from side hustle because I'm doing way more than just one side thing. So, in my life, there's a lot of things that I really enjoy doing. And in my career, I would say I started my career in communications, in PR in London in the early 90s. We barely had, we didn't even have, email at that time. We were faxing things around to news desks. And then I moved to Silicon Valley in 98, continued in communications. And then about 7 years ago, I was like, gosh, I really need to do something more than PR and communications. And so I really just decided to teach myself how to do everything across marketing. And I was lucky enough to find clients that believed in me and gave me that opportunity. So, that's one reinvention in kind of my main area. And I don't know if you've heard this expression of I-based employees and T-based employees.
I'm familiar, yeah.
From the skill set. Yeah. So, I'm definitely a T, like me. And so every time you broaden out the top of that T, I think you're reinventing yourself just a little bit, right? Because I don't think anyone starts as a T, right? You might start with the innate desire to be one and be very curious. But I think in general, it's helpful to have a groove to begin with, some area of expertise.
Were you always curious?
Yes, actually I was. And even when I grew up in England and we don't have grades the same way, but it must have been probably in third grade, I would say the equivalent, where my teacher was about to tell us something one day. And, what was 8 or something? He was like, Alice, before I tell you, I don't want you to ask why. I think I asked why all the time.
That's a good question.
Even my teachers were like, enough with the why. This is just the way it is this way because I say it's this way. So yes, and I do think curiosity is really, the fastest route to discovery. And, let's face it, I think behind every big invention is curiosity, right?
So would you say it's curiosity that led you to build Flock Marketing?
Well, you're making me think of do you have this saying in the US, curiosity killed the cat?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Well, so thankfully that hasn't happened to me, but I don't know if it was curiosity. I think, my career in the early days was, not even the early days, but for the first kind of 15 years, I was working for other people. I was an employee. I was fortunate enough along the way to be kind of a paid entrepreneur for a couple of different brands. Actually, they were UK-based companies that wanted to start operations in the US, and they needed someone with an entrepreneurial spirit and, knowledge of the market to start things up for them. But it wasn't my money. I was on salary. So that was a comfortable way to, maybe not particularly comfortable, but perhaps a little more of a secure way to experiment with entrepreneurship. And then I started my own business. My first own business was actually 11 years ago. And I think that what led me to start Flock, and I'll just explain what Flock is for everybody. So there's two parts to that business. Now, it's super trendy all of a sudden to be a fractional C leader. Like, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's like everywhere. And I'm kind of slightly like, okay. I mean, when I first started doing this about 6-7 years ago, like that wasn't really a thing. I mean, I called myself like an acting marketing leader. Or interim, right? And then the fractional word started coming up all over the place. But so part of my business model is that I am an interim marketing leader for businesses that need support. And then only for those clients, I have a team, the Flock, who I flock together, based on whatever the need is across all of the marketing disciplines. So I don't know how familiar or entrenched you are in marketing, but I think one of the mistakes that a lot of startups make is they're like, I'm going to make a marketing hire, and they expect that marketing person to do every facet of marketing. And marketing, and I don't know enough about engineering, but to me, it's become much more like that. You don't just hire one engineer and go check the box. I've got engineering covered, right? So, in my Flock, I have all sorts of different skill sets, from lead generation to design, different designers, web developers, tons of different kinds of writers. I think that's another mistake I see, whether we hired a writer. Well, someone who's really great at writing punchy, snappy email copy is probably not going to be the best person to write your CEO's byline for Forbes, right? So that's more of a journalistic background. So lots of different kinds of writers, PR, communications. Obviously, I drive marketing strategy, marketing budgeting, how to build a team, what that team should look like. I build org charts a lot for companies. And so I can bring either a whole marketing team in a box to the table, or I can just bring the pieces that are missing, right? So if it's like a chocolate box and, these 3 flavors are not there, then I can fill them in. So, that's was really the driving force for me, I would say, to do Flock, is that I just really I always say I enjoy being a consultant. I feel like that's how I am, but like a consultant with a small c. I'm not the kind of consultant that comes in and says, okay, here's all you need to do. Good luck, right? But really I'm an operator at heart. I love to then follow through on that strategy and to figure out like how to make it happen, execute, get the programs in place. So that was really, at the time I put Flock together, so that was in 2016, I saw a real need in the market for that, right? Either there were people that could come alone and be an acting or interim leader, or there were individual freelancers, but they weren't able to be part of, they weren't seeing the whole picture necessarily. Or there were expensive marketing agencies and like really expensive branding agencies. And I think that, I don't think that marketing necessarily has to be that hard or, or that much of a mystery, right? I don't know. Can I swear on this podcast?
Sure.
I've been thinking about putting a podcast together called It's Only Fucking Marketing.
That's a fun title.
Well, I think there's a lot, for a lot of people, it really is so daunting that they end up not doing it. And I see one of the things, I'm often the first marketing person to the table for a startup. And I say I'm always, then I'm the first marketing person to leave that table, but that's fine. But my observation, and it's not rocket science, is that, in the beginning of a startup, the 3-legged stool that needs to exist is product, sales, marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think of a 3-legged stool, if one of those legs is missing, short, the thing's going to be unstable. And every startup starts with product, right? And then they realize they have to sell. So then they get sales, and then they often tend to bolt marketing on at the end, maybe 2 weeks before launch. Hey, we're launching something. Can you get us like the Wall Street Journal, or can you do this or that? And, I really do believe that even if you're not ready to, fund a full-time marketing hire or team early on, you should have a marketing brain at the table, an advisor or, a friend of your company that can at least input to kind of how the strategy is evolving. I mean, there's things in product. I don't know. I'm sure this is a familiar story to you. You come to the table later on, and if marketing had been involved in some of the earlier product development conversations, there may have been a more built-in way to extract data or usage insights or, understanding who is doing what where. And because those become our marketing stories, right? Those become the compelling reasons to buy and engage for other customers. But I mean, I can't even count on, I'd be there all day at the number of companies where I'm like, oh, can you just tell me like, what is the most popular, used part of this product that you've built? Or, what does the data tell us about user behavior? And they're like, oh, we haven't built the analytics yet. So I don't know if that rings true for you, but I feel like if marketing has a voice early on, then you can help maybe, bake it in early.
What would you say is the recommended time for a founder to hire or talk to a, fractional CMO, as you call it?
Yeah, well, I don't love that word, but I think that even in ideation, I mean, hopefully most founders have somewhere in their network a friendly marketer, right? Like take them out for lunch, buy them a drink, run the idea past them, because I always feel that, in that product sales marketing, and of course companies develop, and there's many other elements that you need, operations, HR, et cetera, customer success. But those three to me are at the core. And if you bring representatives, those brains work differently, right? They see different things. When I first go into a company, I'm normally working with people who have spent the last, 6, 12, 18, 24 months really looking inside. Like they barely see the light of day. They're busy coding. They're trying to figure out how to make the thing work. I walk in there and all I'm doing is looking out the window, thinking about how do I take it to the world and how is the world going to receive it? And does the world want it, right? So, I mean, you've heard of, solutions seeking a problem. That's not where you want to start your company, right? So, early on, I mean, again, even if it's just a friend or it's a small kind of retainer or you get an advisor. I mean, I've worked with a number of companies in the beginning as an advisor. So, some kind of like advisory options type of thing. And I'm like, look, I'll give you 6 to 8 hours a month of input, but I don't have deliverables, right? If you want me to execute and do things, then there's some cash. It has to exchange hands with that.
Okay.
But that marketer should ideally be asking you, like, well, who do you think your customer is going to be? And what are those archetypes? Like, is it just one customer with one problem? Is it a set of different customers with a different set of problems? How are you going to prioritize the problems that you tackle? Have you talked to them? I mean, honestly, then again, it is surprising to me, but it's true. Like, you can go talk to companies that are like, well, we're ready to launch. And I'm like, oh, well, have you tested? Did you get like, either friends and family, if it's more of a consumer thing?
Yeah.
Did you get, by all means do paid trials, whatever, but get input from your customers, right? Like if you want them to part with money, like you need to be really sure that they're going to, that they're going to find value in what you have. And there's only one way to find out. That's really to have them try it and then ask them what it was like. Again, that's why I called my podcast that rude name, because to me, it's fundamental stuff. It's not hard, but if you skip it, it gets hard, right? I think it's really hard because it's really hard to go back and rebuild products because your product market fit is off, So anyway, yeah.
Well, maybe it's easy for you because you're just such an expert at it.
I mean,
it's foreign to a lot of founders, for sure.
I don't want to fall into that compliment, but I think a lot of it is just like real life. Is like, if you want someone to love the gift you're giving them, it's probably better to know them first and know what it is that they're going to enjoy, right? I mean, so I think a lot of marketing is psychology, and it's just a lot of, understanding how humans operate. And so I always try and start all marketing stories with like, a person having a problem, and then we can be the implicit solution to that problem, But yes, of course, I do have experience. So I shouldn't overstate that it's that easy, but I do think it's a lot of common sense.
So other than listening to your podcast, how would a founder learn about marketing?
Which I haven't launched yet, so I need to do that. How would they find out about marketing? I mean, I do think a lot of it is in networking, but I think a lot of it is in paying attention. So, I really enjoy looking at things, with like I said, we have the different brain, right? So I'll look at something with a marketing brain and be like, that was really clever. That was smart, So, but if they see things out in the world in their day-to-day life, like just pay a little bit more attention to like, how did you hear about something new? How did you, find the interaction to be when you were on their website or trying to find out more information? Like, I think you can always put your feet in the shoes of being a customer, even if it's not for your own product, for any product, and just create. I had a coach that said, be a social anthropologist. Like, just be in that observer mode of like understanding and seeing like, oh, this is what they did. It's really clever. I want, is there a way to emulate that? How could we include that into art? So that would be like probably the easiest thing to do. And then, as I had mentioned before, like build your network, make sure that there are marketers in your network who are willing to spend a little bit of time with you and educate you. But like all things in life, you have to be interested in being educated, right? Because I do think a lot of people, you could say it's only bleep marketing in a different way, as in like, how hard can it be? Like, I'll just tack it on at the end. Right? So, yeah.
On that topic, I feel like I love observing the world around me, especially when it comes to sales, because that's something I'm trying to like learn now.
Yeah.
And I probably give more people chances to pitch at me than others might. And a lot of these people run marketing agencies of some kind. And I recognize that like a lot of times I hear the pitch, and the pitch is really almost identical from one org to another.
Right.
How do you, as a leader of an agency, stand out in a crowded space? Like, what is your voice that stands like what? Or your...
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, what I would tell a client is like, you have to have a platform. You need to have a voice that is going to say something that is going to be interesting to people. You need to have a point of view on things. Yes, I agree that. I mean, that's partly why Flock is, I suppose, an agency, but I have run like big agencies, and I just ended up finding that it was, not to be rude or cynical, but it was a thankless task. It was a little bit of a fool's game, because differentiation is really hard. And so what happens when you can't differentiate? You become a commodity. What happens when you become a commodity? It's a price race to the bottom. And that just wasn't something I enjoyed doing, And I am a little concerned right now in this market of like, there being an explosion of like fractional leadership. There's marketplace platforms emerging, etc., that it's going to commoditize and race down to the bottom of price. And I don't think that's what this skill set is about. It's not like, can you get it cheaper? It's like, can you do it smarter? Can you do it that in a way that connects to your customer? Can it accelerate your sales? Can it, also at the same time help your company stand for something that is meaningful? And I think purpose-driven, mission-driven, we can come on to that, is something that creates a lot more stickiness. And there's plenty of companies now that have shown us that you can have a very profitable, revenue-driven B corporation. Are you familiar with B Corps?
I'm familiar with B Corps, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't mean, I know like a lot of VCs don't want to invest in a B Corp because they blah, 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 blah. Like, I mean, it means that they're not, the return to the shareholder is not the number one goal of the company.
Yeah.
But I do hope that we start to move into, a phase in industrialized, Western world history that is not just about me, and is a bit more around how do we be of benefit to, the community, the smaller community that we work, live, operate in, the larger global community that is, under threat from so many different elements right now that may or may not be in our control. And so, it's good to see companies do more. I think the pandemic maybe has kind of knocked sideways some of those more endeavor-driven businesses for the time being, because everyone's suddenly in a fight for survival. And hopefully we'll start to see some more of that innovation emerge, you know?
Thankfully, I think of marketing as like a more creative domain. And the thing about creative domains is that like you can't value art the same way, right? Like you can go to a museum, especially in like modern art museums, you can look at one piece and look at another piece, and you really can't tell what the price is.
Right. Because it shouldn't, I mean, art shouldn't necessarily be about price, right? I mean, it should be about the joy and the, you know, trigger in a good way, but what it elicits as a response from the eye of the beholder. And I think it's interesting that you touched on that word art. So, I mean, you know, if you take a step back, if you think about when the Mad Men, right? I mean, that's how advertising, creativity, marketing in the 50s, I mean, advertising and all those things evolved long before. I mean, I'm sure, you know, the oldest profession in the book, right? is and then and then the second oldest profession in the book is communications, because someone had to tell everyone about who to go to. I mean, that's just how humans are, right? I mean, they refer, they recommend. I mean, now it's all kind of like turned into a science, but I mean, it's human behavior, really. And if you look at how marketing has changed, I mean, since I started my career to today, and I'm sure how it will continue to change, I mean, the big change like 15, 20 years ago was self-publishing, right? I mean, it used to be that publishers were the only ones that got to control what was out in the medium. Then we were able to start publishing for ourselves. Then businesses recognized that they could publish for themselves. And then social media erupted, and individuals recognized that they could publish back to the big corporations, and that no longer did the corporation have the megaphone and say, I'll tell you what I want to tell you when I want to do it, and that's all you're going to hear. Suddenly they were put in a position of having to respond to, you know, the little person who had like a strong point of view and a platform. And then analytics emerged and evolved around all of that. And so suddenly, where I believe marketing used to be a very humanities-based, art-based endeavor on many levels. I mean, media planning and buying definitely was not. It was more of a math. But, you know, it suddenly became very computational and math-driven. And I did see a lot of companies over the last 10 years, and I think it's shifting a little bit more now, where they would swing all the way to math-driven, you know, computational marketing. I mean, I remember meeting with startups at South by Southwest in like 2013, and they're like, yeah, we're not hiring a regular agency. We're going to build an algorithm, and we're just going to, you know, send out automated AI-driven emails to 10,000 journalists around the world. Actually, that company, I don't know if that particular tactic worked for them, but they're a pretty big deal these days. So, you know, I mean, so there was a lot of that. And, you know, and I worked for companies that were spending millions a month on SEM. So they were getting eyeballs in the parlance. They were getting people to click on their link, but they were not investing, I would say, practically zero in brand. And they were a pretty big company. And so people were landing on that website, and it meant nothing to them. They were like, interesting, straight out bounce. So that is not, you don't want to be in that place either, right? So you have to tell stories, you have to build brand, you have to build affinity. Your customers have to see themselves when they land on your site, interact with you, wherever they interact with you, and see themselves like in the world that you're trying to create. And if they can't even read that world, if that world is not there, not existing, then they're going to just, you know, keep on driving by like it's the i5 or whatever, right? Nothing to see here. So I do think that there seems to be more conversation these days, like when I go to like growth conferences or what have you, where the pendulum is swinging back more to the middle, where it's like you need a marketing team that's really balanced with, you know, humanities driven, creative people, and then folks that can amplify and distribute, because, you know, it is just, you can't have one or the other. You can have a killer content creation program, but if that content never gets out in the world and people can't discover it, you know, because that's another big mistake people make, is like, well, I put it on my website, people will find it. Well, that's, you know, that doesn't generally happen. People don't normally come and read every page of your website and every blog post you've ever posted, right? So you have to show up in their day-to-day as they're on their journey. Anyway.
Well, that leads me to the next question I want to ask you. So for all these founders who are experts in their field and trying to create a problem that solves a problem at scale, how do you help them take that message and deliver it? Like, how would you, let's call it like a two-person startup, just like two co-founders in their garage creating a product. How would you recommend they broadcast that to the world?
I mean, the first thing, that's a big question, right? And there's not a straight answer to that question, but the way I approach it, I mean, the first thing I always do is figure out, what is the narrative here? They'll have their narrative, and sometimes that might be enough, right? I mean, I worked with Nest in the very early days. There was 10 people, and Tony had a great story. He was like, it maybe not be a story that related to everybody at that time, but he was driving to Tahoe to his, remote second home or third home or what have you. And we get there after a long drive late at night and it would be freezing cold. And he was like, why can't I just crank up the heat when I'm an hour out so I can walk into a warm house, right? Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that, nobody knew if that was going to fly. I mean, like the idea of a thermostat being sexy. I mean, at that time, this was 2010, I think. So, the kinds of things that, Fitbit was really interesting. Jawbone was around it. There's people were looking at personal wearable fitness devices. IoT was really about, personal health. But the idea of smart home was really only just starting to crack the surface a little bit. So, there was a good story around that. And that, they had a good story because also it was Tony Fadell and there was the Apple connection. And, they raised a huge amount of money before they even because people wanted to put money in. So, I mean, I don't remember, but it was like tens and tens and tens of millions. It wasn't like, hey, we got 4 million or 5 million, whatever. So, a story like that on some level can tell itself, especially if you have a very credible storyteller, which, of course, he had all those chops. And then a story from someone that maybe is not well known, maybe it's still a great, you might be trying to solve a really common problem that people are having. Take Fitbit for an example. I mean, really, it was a fancy pedometer, but it was started to sell a lifestyle around that. And the ability to see data on your phone, like a pedometer was something crappy like this that just had a digital display on it. It wasn't cool. You didn't interact with it. You couldn't have community. You weren't able to add in what you ate that day. And so, as that story evolved, and I talked to those founders very early on, unfortunately, we were too busy to take on their work. But that was a cool story as well. They were not necessarily known, but you could see a way to build that story. And you look out in the world and you go, obesity is a terrible problem in the USA, right? Cost of healthcare skyrocketing because people's health. So you can tie into those things and that becomes part of your narrative. I'm not saying that that's exactly what they did, but that's the kind of thing I'd look at. And then you can be in front of someone that's trying to sell B2B software that's document management. And you're like, well, I don't have where's the sex appeal to this, right? So then you really have to make sure that you are solving a problem in either an intuitively different, better way than it is being solved right now, or maybe it's not being solved right now, or at least you can tell a story that's strong enough to get your first 2 or 3 big name clients in the door. Maybe you won't be a big marketing sensation. And then that's when you get more to the account-based marketing where I'm sure you're familiar with this. Companies are like, I only need 10 customers this year. I don't need 10 million. I have a list of 2,000 company organizations. I just need to, like you and I were saying earlier on, just need 1 or 2 of those to respond. So let's be really precision targeted. So you might never become a household name, but you may, be an incredibly successful revenue, positive company. But again, it's the same exercise. What is it that is going to be the narrative that hooks in those prospects? because I always say, and I mean, I do relate a lot of what I do back to kind of like core basic human psychology. It's like if you show up at an event, I know we don't go to many of those anymore, but you don't know anyone, you see a group talking and you kind of like sidle over and you're like, oh, you don't just, I mean, most people don't just march over and be like, hey, this is what I want to talk about, right? You kind of sit there and you listen for a minute and you're like, oh, and then you might chime in with like something that's relevant to the conversation. And then over the course of a few minutes, you might be the one kind of like holding the conversation. But businesses have to do the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. They have to listen in. They have to know what people want to talk about, why they want to talk about it, and have a point of view on that before they can start owning the agenda. Mm. You kind of have to earn that right. I mean, I believe,
How has marketing, or I guess more specifically, your marketing campaigns changed over your career and I guess across different companies?
Well, I mean, the very early days, I worked with a lot of consumer brands and in London. And in London, and I think it's still pretty true, but it's a small country. I mean, look, we're a large country here that's very obsessed with celebrity. But because the UK is very small, we have a small set of media. What celebrities do and where they show up is really, there's paparazzi following them all over the place, right? I mean, and that on some level is why Lady Diana, Princess Diana, became such a phenomenon in the UK first, because she was, she had sex appeal, glitz, glamour, she was princess, then there was heartbreak. I mean, there was just always like it just was really compelling. And so, I think in those days in the UK, like if you wanted something to like fly, you would get a celebrity involved in what you were doing. Mm-hmm. And yes, of course, Ashton Kutcher. I mean, there are celebrities that get involved, and there's a really great skincare brand that's gotten like Olivia Wilde involved, and there are companies that still use that. And I think in consumer circles, depending on what it is, that can be really relevant and pertinent. I think the way, social media, the way at digital advertising, that changed everything really. Because I think on some levels it took away the need for like the best creative. You just had to show up at the right time.
I see.
Yes, the message is important, but I know we all hate it, right? We all hate being retargeted. Like, why is that around the web? And by the way, I bought them 3 weeks ago. Like, I don't need you to advertise that to me anymore. So,
yeah, I get that all the time.
A lot of these things are still blunt instruments, but I think that's a lot of the way. These aren't necessarily campaigns that I run, but and then there's new mediums, right? So content marketing is a massive shift. Yeah. Look, we always produce content. It just wasn't called content marketing, right? Back in the day, we published hard copy internal communications newsletters. They weren't in an email. Mm-hmm. They were printed like a little newspaper and shipped out once a month. But that was content creation, content marketing. Now content is kind of everything. Like we all have become huge consumers all the time, like voracious, right? That's the whole thing about COVID. Oh, I finished Netflix, right? And then actually, I think we all said that was as a joke. I was listening to something last week and that for all of those big content creation businesses, that's a real problem for them. Like people, they can't create enough content quickly enough. And they froze everything for 6 months last year. So, everyone has a problem in terms of creating content. But, I think that content digital, there are so many, podcasts have become such an established medium. I'm in the middle of producing a podcast for a client. Now, now brands are starting to do limited series podcasts. And, again, if you get in front of the right 100, 5,000, 10,000, doesn't have to be the most popular podcast in the world. Just has to be to the right people. So,
do you have a favorite campaign that you've run in your career?
That's a hard one. I think one of the pieces of work that I'm most proud of is probably not something that you will have ever come across. There's some fun ones I can tell you about. But, for me, especially in the means that I work in, as in, you know, there's a beginning, middle, and end normally to the work that I do. Having the ability to see something go through that entire arc is very rewarding. And I was working with a company called Flux, Flux, a few 2 or 3 years ago, and I took them through everything from kind of like reimagining their mission and their vision, through to, you know, reviewing what was happening in marketing and the types of campaigns, and then taking it all away and delivering that message to the customer by reinventing their customer event. We called it FluxCon. We really just put an amazing wrapper around that. We gave each of the executives a really key element of the story and the narrative to deliver. And to see customers fly in, you know, it's in San Francisco, and just be so fired up and energized because they just loved what they had been hearing from the company, and it resonated and it was what they needed. That was super, super rewarding. I mean, and there were lots of different elements to it along the way, but I think, you know, that's what makes a campaign kind of rewarding, and you know that it's worked when you see people like in real life, you know. And we have a great video actually of people kind of saying how they felt about the event as they were leaving. Then you kind of know you've got it right, you know, because it's easy. And especially in a world of remote working right now, you sit here, you do this all day long, and then you're like, I don't know, in a couple of days, you might look at some numbers and be like, oh, well, that one landed. But it's data, and it's good data, but it's not seeing the delight of the customer, you know, in real life. I think nothing really beats that, you know. And then we did some fun campaigns. I mean, these are a few years ago, but I worked with McAfee for a long time. And we did a campaign called, it was real simple. They had data on what links people would click on that would yield the most spyware and nasty stuff being downloaded. And no surprise, a lot of hackers realized that people will click on celebrity news. We talked about celebrity before.
Yeah.
And so we did a campaign called Most Dangerous Celebrities. And we would announce every year who was the most dangerous celebrity. So we had Jessica Biel was the most dangerous celebrity. Brad Pitt was the most dangerous celebrity. Then we did a really fun, I think Cameron Diaz was the most dangerous celebrity. And we would, like, you know, simple stuff. We would just buy a stock photo, release it out to the wires. We would do like a little, like, you know, video clip and have that out. This was really a PR campaign. And then I think with Jessica Biel, we actually, we made a trophy and we shipped it to her agent. And then through a back channel, we heard that she got it, and it was on her mantelpiece, and she thought it was phenomenal. So,
that's cool.
I mean, those are just fun things. I mean, those were some of the things where, like, you could ask someone, oh yeah, I saw that, you know. I mean, it was about trying to make people realize they shouldn't do things like that and to keep them. But you know, it's fun to have fun with it sometimes too, right? It doesn't have to be all serious.
So in terms of, I think there's the consumer response that you mentioned, right? But there's also like I think the corporations are also viewing it from like the financial angle, not so much, or at least sometimes they view it from the financial angle. Like what is a typical time frame that you would recommend to, like, I guess, businesses in terms of measuring the ROI of marketing campaigns?
Right. That's a good question. I mean, I think it's really important to, one, have strategy. And again, that seems like a very obvious thing to say, but I can't tell you how many companies skip that and go straight to tactics. I mean, I would say 98% of small companies start with tactics because they have, I mean, it's a founder-itis. Like, there has to be activity, right? Yeah. And they get anxious if there's not activity, and they need to see something. And I totally get that. And I don't think that everything needs like months and years of planning, and, you know, certainly not huge budgets. So I think it's really important to have a plan, like, you know, for the year, like, and also some hypotheses. What are we trying to test? So if it's an early stage company, we're probably trying to figure out how we sell, how do we market, like what works, right? And so you can tell pretty quickly if things are going to work or not. So I think every month, you know, if I'm in a meeting and it's content marketers reviewing what happened in the month, I'm not really interested in like what was the name of the article. And I'm interested in the data, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, sure, the content, what was in the content is interesting, but only if that's the one that like was, have you heard about like unicorn content and donkey content? Yeah. So
I've not heard of donkey content.
Yeah.
It's the opposite.
Unicorn content is hard to come by.
Yeah.
And you might have one piece of unicorn content every 3 years, but it might work for you for year in, year out. And for whatever reason, it just works. The donkey, you can't just cut to the chase and only have unicorns. So donkey content is the workaday stuff that you put out every day, and it just keeps slowly building and improving your SEO and what have you. And it does a job for you, and there's nothing wrong with it. I think understanding and looking behind the activity to the data, again, it's a basic point, is really important. I do think that, especially in digital marketing, I mean, sometimes you can tell in a matter of 24 hours. And it's interesting too, when you start to like look at how publishers, and as we're talking about content right now, how they decide what content to promote. I mean, in my feed, like New York Times sponsored content shows up all the time. They don't treat all content as equal from the beginning. I mean, well, sure, they publish it all that way, but they don't put money behind everything.
Yeah.
They look at it and see what organically is trending, and then they put money behind the trending content. And they might just leave the other alone, or they might do things like, let's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 5 different titles, and see, because it's amazing to me, and I've worked with a couple of publishing houses, and they will test multiple titles for a day or two, and a title can change everything. I mean, if you might get 0 readers or a very small readership if you call it one thing. If you change the subject and the title to a different thing, it could escalate. So I mean, there's so many things to dial into. And then in terms of like marketing ROI, I mean, it really depends on what it is you're talking about. Things like, brand awareness and brand recognition, brand recall, they take a very long time. And also, honestly, it's very expensive to track. So a startup would never track that. But like I said, if you're running a Facebook campaign or LinkedIn campaign, I mean, you're going to have almost real-time data. You can look at Google Analytics in real time, and you can really see like what pages are performing, what pages are people bouncing off. HubSpot, of course, will tell you you're sending out an email newsletter. I mean, within an hour, like, do people open it? What links did they click on? I mean, and that, after 24 hours, that thing's pretty much dead. People don't really go back to email, right? So, so I mean, I think it does depend on. It's important to build in metrics as you're in your planning stage, too, right? So that you're not kind of applying the evaluation at the afterwards, right? In hindsight, that you have an idea in the beginning, but a lot of things could need to be shifted often. So.
On the topic of strategy, when you operate as a CMO, what are all the things that like bounce around your head in terms of thinking about strategy for like different clients?
Like where do I get the ideas from?
Yeah, like where do you get ideas? What do you think is like the most important? Or what are the like important like? How
do I get to strategy?
Yes.
Okay. People always used to ask me when I was running an agency and I'm doing evaluations and stuff. Every junior person would come to me. I mean, every single one. I want to be more strategic. That was something that they didn't want to be doing all the time. And I understand that. And I think, we talked early on about curiosity. I don't think you can be strategic if you're not curious, because to be strategic, you need to actually have some knowledge to draw on. Now, it can be a lot of first-hand knowledge, which at this point in my career, I obviously have access to. But it also can be like second-hand knowledge. It could be like seeing what others do. And so I used to tell those people that came into my office, I'm like, read as much as you can. So now it'd probably be like, listen to podcasts as much as you can. Like whatever, consume information. Like consume information. Because I think that gives you a different lens. And then, I mean, the biggest, well, here, come full circle here. The biggest question about strategy is why, right? Like, why are we doing anything? Like, what do we hope to accomplish? How will we know when we're successful? I mean, those things are really important. And so when someone comes to me and says, oh, well, this is our plan, I'm always going to ask the question I've asked since I was 3. Why? Why are we doing it? Like, where is it getting us? What are we hoping will be accomplished by this? So yeah.
Do you have a favorite book on the domain of marketing, or favorite books or favorite blog posts?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I probably should have a better answer to that question.
No, it's a legitimate answer. I think the answer I usually get from people is either one, they have a resource, or they say like, oh, there's no resource available because the field is so dynamic.
Right. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, I tend to learn a lot from like the world that I'm in, right? So I will, and one of the things that I really enjoy doing, and that I don't know, I just tend to do it automatically, is that I will like, and this word is overused and I don't like it that much, but I will curate, which I just mean I collect. I guess I'm a kleptomania. Like wherever I go, like if I'm wine tasting, I might see something that I really like about the way they package something. And I don't really mean design packaging, but like the way they put the experience together that may be really applicable to a consumer tech client. And it might not have anything to do with the food or wine industry. Or it may be that I have a personal passion for equestrian. I'm an equestrian. So I may see things that are happening in other parts that I'm like, oh, well, here in this world could work really well. So I really like cross-pollinating, I guess is a different word too. And just bringing experience. I don't like being in a box, right? So it's like bringing experiences from here to there. And I think that's how I learn, and that's how I come up with ideas. And I like riffing off things and borrowing from things, but then putting them together in a, unique way. I mean, what I like to do is go at least a couple of times a year to some kind of thought-provoking conference, which has been really hard to do in the last couple of years. And I always will come away with like my own set of takeaways that then I start to see showing up elsewhere in the world, right? And I think in the past I used to be, well, everyone must have had the same takeaways, and my take on it isn't that unique. But actually, I think we all hear and listen to things in different ways, and so it's my take on it, right?
Do you have a list of favorite conferences that you feel like are really thought provoking?
So many conferences have gone away, right? So, and a lot of them grow and they change. So I don't know. Web Summit, which is in Portugal now, they've done some. I went to it when it was a while ago. It was in New Orleans. That was really fun. Oh, actually, that was Collision, which is another one of theirs. I've done the Growth Hacker Conference a couple of times, and I think some of those. When you hear a really great speaker, I mean, for years, that can be with me, and I can completely forget maybe 8 out of 10 of the speakers that I heard, but like, it's worth it for that, 1 out of 8 or 10. Do you watch Ted Lasso?
I do not.
Apple TV. Okay. Well, number one, you got to watch it. It's
Okay.
really brilliant. But to me, that kind of stuff, I get like creative juice from like, it's so smart. It's so funny. It's so clever. It's really subtle. On the top of it, you could write it off as a really bit of cheesy TV, but it's really, really much more sophisticated than that.
Okay.
And so things like that, they just, they make me think, just like it, again, opening up the mind, the brain, like don't be stuck in a groove, right? Yes, have playbooks. Yes, have formulas that work. But I think it's really important to be open to doing things in a new way or a different way. And that is kind of where I think the fun, exciting stuff happens,
Is Ted Lasso associated with like TEDx or like TED?
No.
I see.
It's an Apple TV comedy, basically.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
About an American football coach, well, you wouldn't call him an American, but a football coach that is hired to go run, a small football club in England, in Richmond. He has no qualifications whatsoever. It's Jason Sudeikis. I'm probably saying his name wrong. It's hilarious. It's very, very good. Anyway, it's in the zeitgeist right now. Go check it out.
Okay. In the interest of time, I just want to say I'm thankful for your time. I just want to ask one last question.
Sure.
What is the one thing you wish you knew, or I guess that you've been learning more recently that you wish you knew a long time ago?
I don't know. Let me see. You should have prepped me on that one.
I love people's reactions when I don't prep them.
I don't know. What do I wish I knew?
Could be personal, could be work, could be anything. Just what wisdom do you wish to impart on others that you wish you knew at an earlier age?
Okay. It has nothing to do with work. The parenting is really hard. My son just graduated high school, and and also I guess I thought by now it might be easier, and it's actually more hard. So just remember, the cute babies turn into like. I mean, I'm being a bit silly, but I think that's been one of the hardest journeys of my life, honestly.
How many children do you have?
I have one.
Okay.
And I've raised him on my own, so that feels like having two. No, I don't know. But yeah, you learn a lot from that too. I guess that like a word of wisdom is just try and learn from everything that you do, and don't constrain where you take those learnings. Like, you can apply them anywhere, right? Like dealing with a teenager is very useful in my work with clients.
Teenagers are, I think, one of the greatest sources of learning about marketing. I think it was Gary Vee who first was like, no, everyone stop trying to pay attention and stop paying for ads on Facebook. Go to TikTok. And I was like, TikTok, is that really that popular? And lo and behold, a few years later, it's like crazy popular.
Yeah. Well, Snapchat too. I mean, yeah. I mean, we expect a lot of them. They have a lot of things that they have to put right with the world. So, yeah.
They're also the next generation. They are the world given enough time.
That's what I'm saying. And I think they feel a lot of pressure in a way that I certainly didn't, well, thank you for having me. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks for being on the show. And we love to hear your marketing insights.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, any final words you want to give? Do you want to just give a spiel of your company in case anyone in the audience wants to reach out?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Alice Chan. My website is Flock, FLOCK, MKTG, short for marketing.com. And yeah, I think we work best with, startups from like late C to probably C stage. And as I said earlier, I'm either the first marketer in, or maybe the fourth or fifth, when companies are really trying to figure out what kind of market they may have hired, made the commitment, and haven't found that right blend. Because I think every company needs a different kind of marketer and not all marketers are cut from the same cloth. And I think that's really important for founders to understand. So.
Well, thanks again for your time on the show, Alice.
Yeah, absolutely.